like to start by finding out sort of who kinds of people are in the room and what you want to know rather than, I've got a talk stacked up. I can talk for an hour. You can't hear me? You guys have good acoustics in here. This is very good. How loud do I have to talk? Oh my gosh. There's some chairs up here.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Seriously.
I can't talk at that volume for a whole hour, so if any of you have any trouble, I couldn't possibly talk at that volume for an hour. Let's do that. How many of you are currently programmers in your current assignment? Kind of most of you. How many of you are kind of like project manager-y kind of people in your current assignment? How many of you are something like business analyst or product owner or whatever that is? Anybody from testing? What else is left over? Those of you who raise your hands.
Biz dev.
What's biz dev?
Sales, business development.
Very good. Very good. Anybody else? And you're determined to stand up in the back, so the acoustics are up to you, right? So, it's good. Good deal. One of the things that I kind of do as I go around the world is debunk myths around Agile. It seems to be most of what I do. Because there's a lot of stuff got kind of like dragged along for the ride that was never part of the story. And most of the time if someone tries to correct that, the response is, well, you don't know anything about Agile. So you can't say that to me because I know about Agile. So what I'd like to do is actually to hear some of the things that you guys think that it does mean or doesn't mean. And it'd be interesting to find out from what you hear versus what is like sort of core to Agile or what somehow came along for the ride accidentally. I call them barnacles a lot. But I'd really prefer to operate from questions. In fact, I'm going to turn this dumb thing off for a minute, just so I don't have to stand inside the glare. And now we'll see if the camera still picks up, So I'd love to just like let you guys ask whatever's on your mind, rather than me just giving a canned talk. So, if someone would like to be brave.
So then you can say to us that we don't know anything about Agile.
Well, the thing is that Agile was phrased as a set of values. There are no practices. There are no core practices in Agile. So what happens is that people pick up a book, and in order to be helpful, the book author says, here's some good starter kit to do Agile, and then the people who read the book thinks that those practices means Agile. And if you're not doing those practices, you're not Agile. But in fact, Agile was phrased as a value set of principles. So there is nothing that's inside you. It's really kind of hard to say what it is or what it isn't by looking at practices. But start with any question, just like what's on your mind, things you've heard, things you're worried about. It would be best for me, yeah, please.
Yeah, one question that keeps coming up is how to marry up UX work and Agile. That's always a bit of a challenge in a lot of projects because traditionally UX work lends itself to being at the beginning of projects or in the inception phase versus Agile where you get right into the project and do a lot of things.
Yeah, okay, good. That's wonderful. And I'll use that to pick up an interesting kind of a misconception and also some of the funny stuff that goes on with UX. There's a kind of a misconception that if you do Agile, you don't do any design. That came from the old extreme programming days in the 1990s. And in those days, people would sit for 6 months designing something. And then, of course, as you and I know, it didn't work, whatever they thought, because there's too much treachery inside the details. And so the way they got people to avoid doing too much time designing these things up front is they came up with the acronym BDUF, right? Big design up front. And BDUF was always cast as an insult to anybody. So if you ever did any thinking, they would accuse you of BDUF, and then you had to go stand in the corner, or something like that. And so as a result, there's this concept that there's no thinking, there's no design in Agile, and that's not strictly correct. So inside of your question, you had a reference. You just have to get going. Now, there's an interesting thing. There's a lot of villager mentality around the world. And the villagers come with the pitchforks, the flaming torches and ready to burn somebody or something like that. And this is, I made this up. You guys have heard of Sprint Zero? Has anybody heard of Sprint Zero? Who's heard of Sprint Zero? So where does Sprint Zero come from? Well, I speculated on the Scrum list one day that I think was an architect was doing some design work, right? And the villagers with the pitchforks and the flaming torches came to take him or her off, you know, and hang it from a tree. And for doing this BDUF stuff. And this person said, well, I'm not doing BDUF, I'm doing architecture work. Don't you know why it's Sprint Zero, right? And I said, oh, Sprint Zero, yes, yes, Sprint Zero, we have to have Sprint Zero, right? And so Sprint Zero became canonized and legal. And I actually saw on a Scrum discussion list a reference to Sprint -1. That's why I said, okay, now this has to end here. So Ken Schwaber wrote back on the list and said, yeah, that's exactly what happened, right? So the thing is, this is this myth stuff, is all this junk comes along for the ride with Agile that was never in there at the beginning. Well, one of them is you're not allowed to do any thinking or designing before you start. Well, now we've got a legitimate, you're allowed to think for 3 weeks now, because that's how long a sprint is, and you get Sprint Zero, and so you can think for 3 weeks or whatever you want to do. But basically, sometimes you need to do certain kind of pre-work before you can get into the building work. And in the olden days, it was too long, and these days, sometimes it's too short. So there's a kind of finding a middle space. So that's part of the inside of her question. Another part that's inside of her question is that the design school, the people who go to design as a career choice in college, are given the mentality that designers are, you know, these thinkers. They have to go off to the mountains and the fjords, and then they come back with the design, and it's brilliant, and you're not allowed to touch it. Now, one of the things that we learned a long time ago is that anybody who has any idea at the beginning, the idea is probably wrong. And that is as true with the interaction designers as it is with anybody else. So my friend and colleague, Jeff Patton, who will be here actually this next week and the week after for the Agile conference, went around to one of these big design companies. You know, who's the guy? Alan Cooper. He went to Cooper and Company and said, so you guys do all these work, and your business model is you go do all this pre-work, you produce this UI design that's fabulous for, you know, all this kind of thing. How many of them actually ever implement whatever you say, you know, as you say it? And they go, no. No, of course not, because when you produce a document that thick, as Jeff would say, it's got so many decisions baked into it that can't possibly be correct. As he would say, you can't know that much about the answer this early in the project. You'll find things out that are wrong. So the part of the answer is if there's a UX designer who says, you programmers are dummies, let me figure this out, can't work. That's why we wrote the manifesto, because we know that in any what I call a promissory note, all of these documents are promissory notes. It says, if you let us build this, it will be wonderful. Or if you have a design document that says, we promise you that we'll build it to this design and it'll fit all the specs and no problem, don't worry about it. Well, they're both wrong because they have untested assumptions, and that'll be in the slideshow I'll show you in a bit. So there's a flaw. So the people who come out of design schools doing UX have this myth, this mythology around the designer who comes up with this great thing and never needs to be tested, and it's always, you know, flawless, which is of course not true. You take that and you take that with the Agile programmers who are doing this, growing software or laminating it, you might say. Growing it piece by piece and making it thicker over time. The good news about growing or laminating is that you uncover lots of problems early on, and you can fix the problems when you always have working software, and you can steer and change, and that's the stuff that we like inside of Agile. So you get one of these designer type people who's been to college, and you put them with an Agile crowd, and you've got a fundamental conflict. There's a guy in New York City who's in the UX side of the world, he runs the UX department, and he talks about having to try to re-educate the designers he hires so that they have a concept of incremental iterative development. Okay. That having been said, the opposite flaw happens so often on Agile projects is that the UX designers are told, you never have to do anything up front. You have to do just-in-time design, just like we have to do just-in-time design. And there's a bit of a problem because that doesn't really work with UI design because you need consistency across screens and you need to know what the flow is, and there's some stuff that has to be done like kind of broadly and so on. So the UX designers get kind of trapped. It's a neither nor, right? They can't do it all on the fly because they can't do it all on the fly. And it doesn't make any sense for them to do it all up front because it'll just be wrong. So it's kind of one of the open mysteries in the Agile world right now, is how do we language or strategize the amount that should be done up front with the stuff that's done on the fly. And Jeff Patton, who's my reference point on this, since he spent the last 10 years really studying the UX community and all that stuff, said there's three, if you read the literature, three categories of sort of UX people. There's the before people, the during people, and the after people. The before people are the ethnographers, and they go out and study the user groups and try to find out what their values are and their habits and their working style. They do all that stuff. They have to do it before. You can't do that on the fly. You have to understand your audience. And those are the before people. And those are needed inside the UX work. Then there's the during people. Those are the people who are building the screens and doing all of this stuff along the fly and hooking in with the APIs and all that stuff. And the after people are the testing people. Well, you built it. Now you take it out and you show it to someone, you find out, is it actually usable, does it work, anything like that. The bad news for the UX people is there actually have to be all three. So the UX people need some before time to understand the user community, they need during time, the during stuff on the fly, they need after time to test and revise the stuff that's been built. That's the UX, that's the law. And he said, we want to spend enough time up in front to move the big boulders, make the big decisions that are very hard to reverse. There are some that are hard to reverse, very expensive. We want to take more time and think about those early on so we don't have to change it later. There's a lot of stuff that you can take it on the fly. We'll call them little rocks, and you just do them naturally. So whether it's for architecture or it's for UX or whomever, you do the big rocks up front, little rocks on the fly, and that's kind of an approach to play with. You'll get from my answers that this stuff has progressed. The Agile Manifesto was written 12 years ago. So the world's moved on quite a lot since that time. So the answers that I'm going to be giving you to any questions are probably more subtle and with gradients on it and nuanced than the stuff that's in the popular books. Because the popular books take very simple, old school 1990s, mid-1990s style, 3 to 6 person projects, co-located team, one technology base. Life was simple, you do some simple stuff and you get away with it. These days things are we're applying Agile to more complicated contexts. And so the answers, the strategies become a little bit more subtle. So thanks for that first question. If we do this, I'll need only like 3 questions to fill up the whole time. So anybody got something that's bothering you or you're wondering about, you might as well ask it.
What about documentation? I'm on a project that could not in any way be described as Agile in the way we work. We write documents and they get signed off, and then we write code to implement that. And then later on, when the client says the system's broken in this way, we do sometimes point to the document and say, well, you said back here that this was the case, is that no longer true? Which is useful, not from a blame perspective, but about framing, how did we get there, how do we get out of here?
I just have the story that's in my head I want to tell about people who write this requirements documents and sign, in blood that this is what they really want. And it was a guy I met, fascinating guy, and he lives on a houseboat in the mountains of Utah or something, and he hates people and he just writes code. And the guy is brilliant because just all on his own, he writes code that helps distinguish what's bone from flesh from tendon in cow carcasses coming down the line. And what it takes to do that, I got no idea, right? It's image processing stuff of the highest order. And he asks them, so they're going to do this automated, cutting thing, right? You have this cow coming down, and you want the legs and the steaks and everything coming off, and the blades going in this way. And so he says something about, this is this one part that's really, really going to be difficult for me to tell what's the bone and the cartilage. It's, the shoulder joint or whatever. So will you ever, and whatever question he phrased, would you ever come down and cut here? And they said no. He says, but if I can't do this this is a really difficult part right here. So I really need to know how often you're going to cut right there. They said never. He says, never is a really strong word. I know that the word never isn't the word never. They said never, 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 never. He said, write it in the document because I'm not going to write this piece of code because it's too hard for me. If you say never, it's never, and I'm not going to touch it. Never, 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 in the code, right? Wrote the thing, delivered it, first thing the knife blade comes down right there, right? And they said, hey, it's broken. I said, you told me you would never put a cut there. No, what do you mean? Never, look, it's in the contract. No, I don't care what it says in the contract, this is what we got to do. Right? So much for contracts, which is one of the reasons we don't like contracts, but just apropos people and contracts. Documentation got a really bad rap with extreme programming and also with Agile, because it says, and this is the one value that we wrestled over with a little bit, it says working software over documentation. And I said, yeah, you can't say that, but you need documentation. Well, the purpose of that second value, by the way, you probably guys don't even know what the manifesto says, so I'll just tell you what it says, roughly speaking. There's only 4 things. It says basically we hang our hats on these 4 things. The first is the individuals and their interactions over processes and tools. So while processes are important, tools are important, all of the action actually happens in the way that people interact with each other, and that's where you got our So live around the way people interact. So community, morale, trust, personal safety, amicability, all that stuff. Top order. If you're going to play the Agile game, you got to pay attention to the quality of community and trust. That's it, number 1. Second one says working software over comprehensive documentation. I got the word comprehensive. But the point is, as we were talking earlier, you want reliable markers of progress, and the document isn't one of them. Because the document's a bunch of promissory notes with a bunch of wishes and a bunch of who knows what. But when you have the code and it breaks, I'm sorry, it doesn't matter how optimistic you were before you ran the code, it breaks or it works. Right? It's a reliable measure of progress. It's the second one. The third one is customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And the idea there is why contracts are needed. If you could get the customer over to the same side of the table and now there's just us building this stuff, it works better than if you're going across the table with contracts between them. The fourth one is responding to change over following the plan. This is the one that gets misquoted, meaning you don't build plans. Well, that's wrong. You just have to be really good at building plans because every 2 weeks you're going to find out why the plan's gone out of date. So you got to respond to change and create a plan, and when the plan's just like garbage, then you make a new plan and you try to figure out what to do. But that doesn't mean you don't make a plan. It doesn't mean you don't try to hold on to the plan. It just means that when bad stuff happens and you have to deal with it. So that's that. So because of that second one with the documentation, people go, documents are useless. Well, no. Documents have a place in the story, and people like me don't like promissory notes because they're so incorrect. But you're often in situations where you have to produce the end user documentation, obviously, but you may have other ones for contractual purposes. When you have stuff that's there for contractual purposes, we Agile crowd, use the same approach for documentation as we do for code. You measure volumetrically the lines of document you produce like lines of code, and you schedule it over the course of the project asking when is the latest we could write that. Because the later you write it, the more you know and the less likely you have to change it. So we do what's called a burn-up chart, where you chart time on this and progress on here. And if you say delivered functionality, user stories or screens or something, you get tick marks here and you think you're going to go at that rate, you go at that rate. Whatever you do, you chart it vertically how you do it. Well, you can do the same with documentation, and it's actually easier. So end documentation has got the same volumetric value as software in the sense of the same strategies. How late can you write it? How do you schedule it over time? And so on and so forth. So that one was question was already answered by like 2002 or something like this. But the problem is that the Agile Manifesto has so few words in it that these nuances don't come up. And you have to kind of like be in the discussion. And you have to be hanging out with people who don't throw rotten tomatoes at you if you do something they don't, that doesn't match their version of the what they think Agile means. My message these days is always about retain pragmatics. We wrote this stuff because we were a bunch of programmers who had a bunch of successes behind us, and we were trying to describe how we had success, and one of them is don't waste time on that silly stuff, but also you have to be pragmatic around certain types of things. So does that get to your question about documentation a little bit, or do you have a leftover section of your question?
No, I think that.
I'll get you. All right. Somebody else? Yes, please.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think we struggle with here is that a lot of our clients are government clients.
Yeah.
So it's, at the other end, so if we have a product owner, trying to get one product owner, one person to have responsibility is
Very hard.
very hard.
What's the hard part? Cue me in on that.
Well, it's just that in turn, politics on their side, there might be, I've heard of a couple of examples here where, there's been one person has been appointed from one side of the business and another person from the other side, and they've got their own problems internally with actually appointing a product owner.
So let me pick that one up in a very particular way. Yeah, please.
Sorry, I'll just complement that example with something. Sometimes the product owner helps you with a decision, and the next day when it goes back, there is a working group session in the government, and they change their minds, and it comes back with another, and then that back and forth happens a lot. Because sometimes they cannot really give you the final decision for a long time.
So the second one, in case that doesn't get picked up by the microphone, the first one was the organization where there's two different people who are kind of having wars, and you get conflict of information from product owner. And the second one, I'll pick it up completely separately, so I may ask you to rephrase it again later, was about a product owner who goes back to the group, and then they keep changing their mind, and so the directions wobble a lot. Okay, I'm going to think it's totally separate, so I'll ask you to do that one later. What I want to pick up out of that one is the product owner role in Scrum and the customer role in XP are both sadly over-constrained. They're like impossible roles to fill. And in the case of extreme programming, they were lucky on the first trial runs of XP to have omniscient sponsor users, customers, sitting next to the team, so they canonized that, right? They made it the rule of the game is you must have an omniscient business person sitting next to the dev team. Right? There's one dev team for one project. We're not talking 20 distributed people, right? Stuff. There's like one dev team, one person. But it's very hard to find like a third or fifth example where you can have a dedicated, full-time, omniscient business person sitting next to the dev team. So it's kind of a flaw with XP that got like written straight into the book, into the rule set. Similarly, in Scrum, quite frankly, we were a bunch of programmers in 2001. We got together and said, this is how we work well. And what we really meant was the business needs to show up at our doorway talking this kind of way. Not that we know what goes on in the business. So we were not business experts, expert at the product ownership role, saying this is how we play the product owner role. We were programmers saying this is how we want you guys to show up and talk to us. Right? So it's kind of a problem. We've pushed a whole bunch of problems over there. So the product owner role has been overspecified and is very difficult to fill for various and sundry reasons. The next thing, though, to that, Scrum doesn't try to solve any of your problems except one, which is a bit bizarre. So in terms of the thing I was playing before, Core Scrum, I don't know if anybody was actually listening to that thing. Core Scrum only has got 5 sentences, of which one is a barnacle. Says, you must demo or deliver every sprint. That's your reliable marker of progress. Second is, management assembled a cross-functional team of people allegedly good enough to get the job done. Management now keeps their noses out, and everybody decides everything on their own inside the team because they have an assignment and a mission, and it's their job to get it done, and the professionals leave them alone. Self-organization, self-management. That means the stuff goes bad real fast, so do and inspect and adapt every day. That's the stand-up that you've got. And the purpose of that stand-up is to find out what's going wrong. If something's going wrong, you just have to find it. And also do it at the end of the sprint. At the end of the sprint, you give a demo, and then you discuss what are we going to do differently, style-wise, next time to get better. So continuous improvement, that's cool. That's Scrum. Okay, anything else is not Scrum. Fourth sentence, which is about the Scrum Master role, says it's a good idea to have somebody with some spare capacity to help get rid of the problems for the other people so they can all go full speed. We'll call that person the Scrum Master. They're not the master of anything. They have no authority. They have no decision-making authority. Their job is chief impediment remover to try to make things go smooth for the team. That is the job of the Scrum Master. Then there's this fifth sentence that crawled in under the doorway when they weren't looking or they had too many drinks one night. I have no idea what. And it says, there is a commonly occurring problem we will solve for you right in the canon with the fifth sentence, which is very often multiple people randomly will show up and pull the team in different directions, and that's really frustrating. So we'll require that there's only one set of vocal cords, literally, that can show up and give instructions to the team. So we're solving this problem with this mandated solution. And that's where the product owner comes from. That's it. That's all we know about the product owner. And so that causes some certain amount of distress. But you see it's kind of like an API kind of a discussion. Right? So that's product owner. Now, I'm going to get to the next part, which is if you look at the generic problem of any service organization, not just programmers, but anybody, at any size, from one person to one team to one company to a department of a company, whatever, is that they've got multiple sponsors and they're providing services to multiple people, and those people disagree with each other as to what the priorities are. A completely generic problem, seen it for decades. And there's only one solution I've ever seen work at any size of scale and any place in the world, and that's called the service group doesn't choose the priorities, the people outside the service group choose the priorities. So I'm giving you your answer. And so that's where the single product owner thingy, the single vocal course comes from. It says, only show up in the room after you sorted out what the priorities are. Whatever the political thingies are about doing that, that's not our problem. Somebody would deal with that, which is what you've got there. Companies and divisions of companies that do this find they have to go to all of their stakeholders and create a steering group that comes together once a month or once a quarter that does all the arm wrestling needed to say, here's our capacity. We can't figure it out. You guys figure it out. You give us the priorities we'll implement. Anybody from a single person to a department that ends up having to do prioritization across conflicting stakeholders just has a miserable life and it never goes anywhere. So I'm addressing your question, right?
Yes, well, I guess.
No, I did. Because what you said was you've got, what you said you're doing Scrum, so I gave you Scrum. You got a product owner, I gave you product owner, and they've got their own internal problems. And the answer is they got to sort it out before they come to your place, right?
So it seems to me that...
And you have to facilitate that for them.
Sure, that's where I was getting to, is that we need to have someone who's perhaps coaching that single set of vocal cords or something to help them to make the decision.
Well, they know you go to their place and they come to your place and you do it together, right? Yeah. And you do it with cards. You do all the stuff, right? You got the cards, you got the colors, you got the sizes, you got the T-shirts. So you've got all the tricks in the book at your disposal. You've got your capacity. You say, here's about how much stuff we can do, right? But you guys have to make it sorted out, right? I don't think you have a choice. I don't know. People come up with interesting strategies that I've never heard before, and they sometimes work. So, what have you got?
Well, no, it just seems to me that quite often the people that we want, there'll be someone at the client side who we want to be making those decisions, because they understand the problem best at their end, but for whatever reason we can't get them working with us full time, and we get someone else who might be an underling or whatever who has to go back to that person or whatever.
Yep.
And we just start ending up with this chain, and we get the Chinese whispers thing going on and all that kind of stuff. So it seems to me that unless we can get directly back to that person and get them involved, then we're kind of setting ourselves up to fail if we've got this environment.
Yep.
So maybe we should be looking at running it a different way.
Nope.
Fair enough. Yeah.
No, let me just ask you this. So this is, for me, as far as I'm concerned, there's always two choices. There's never one, there's never three. There's three, there's two, it doesn't matter, right? But there's those two. And one is you keep doing it the way you've always been doing it, one is you do this other way. And if the Agile way is no better than the other way, then it doesn't matter. If the Agile way is worse than the other way, do it the other way, right? But if neither of them's perfect, you can't get mad at the Agile way for not being perfect, because it didn't solve the problem that you already didn't have a solution to. It's like you're no different than you were before. So what if you say, running on that, what are you going to do? If none of the suggestions we have for getting the information works, what's your alternative plan B that's going to be better? And why don't you just do that anyway? You see where I'm going?
Yeah.
So what is a B? Name an alternative.
Running away from the project. Yeah.
So there's your B. No, that's very good, right? So you always have two. You always have two, right?
If we can't get someone to make a decision, then we should, tell
No,
them.
you make up a strategy. So if you can't get someone, that's different. To say, I'm getting bad decisions, you're getting decisions. If you say, I'm getting no decisions, that's different. And what you'll learn with me, there's millions of strategies. I go around and collect strategies. Collect strategies. You should have buckets full of strategies that are not in any book that you apply to all situations are different. The strategy for bad decisions is different than the strategy for no decisions. The strategy for no decisions is you just make your own decisions. You just decide. You do something. Right? I mean, because A, B, what's the alternative? You're not going to make a decision, you're not going to deliver. You are going to make a decision, you'll deliver something that's probably wrong but may be right. Right? So B is better than A, so B. See how I'm doing this? I don't get attached to this, what does Agile mean, but there's always strategies. And sometimes you're just in a bad situation and there's going to be like nothing that works. And then you decide, we got to fold the project and go home. That's B is fold the project and go home. Right? So there's no, Agile doesn't bring anything magical. Agile says get the people together and they'll kind of sort it out. It's very kind of Scrum-like in that sense. And it's very rare that you're going to be in some lovely sweet spot on your project where all the bits come together magically. Agile doesn't produce the magical stuff. It just says, build a piece at a time and get the people to think about it together. That's the best you can ever do. Right? So, and then people like me, I got lots of stories. I'll say, how about this, how about that, about this, about that. But in the end, you're going to get some particular strange thing that will work exactly for you. That's all I've got.
Yeah, no, it's just gonna, if it works, that's good.
I had someone ask me what if the people on the team just aren't good enough to get the job done? Then what? You fail. It's very simple. If you have these people have to climb this like rock face and they're not good enough rock climbers to climb the rock face, it doesn't matter how many project managers with sharp pointy sticks you've got at the bottom of the cliff. Right? It doesn't matter how pointy the sticks are, you're not going to climb to the top. Right? So it's very easy to set up projects where you literally can't pull it off. You're just in bad shape. It's very easy to do. We do that all the time. And Agile doesn't fix any of that stuff. And especially, on the business side, the client side, you're the other end of the contract, you're in a different organization, they got their own stuff going on over there. You're lucky you get any kind of information, right? But what was the better one? The alternative was you write the whole document up front. And then you point to the contract, so you said that, right? And maybe that works better. Maybe that's the A that works better than B. Maybe not, because the thing with the knife blade and the cow cart, it didn't matter what they put the contract. The shoulder shows up on a belt the way it shows up, and you have to do what you have to do. And now yours was, tell me yours one again.
When they go back to the business, but they cannot make their mind up, or they change decisions often.
Very good.
And you're going in one direction, the decision changes. You go in another direction, the decision changes.
So let's call that B. What was A? What's the alternative that we would have?
Don't allow the change.
Okay, that's very good. So why are we allowing them to change their mind?
They pay us money.
Do they pay us money per?
No.
So is this
Not really. What if you realize that you were wrong and now that's the right direction to go, and then you learn something else, and then and that happens all the time. If you are investigating the situation and you find, I was wrong again, what can I do?
Yeah.
And that's where we should
I
go.
like this guy. He argued on both sides of his own argument. Did you notice that? That was wonderful. So you gave half of my answer for me, so I don't have to give that half. So that was very good. So the thing is, when someone changes their mind, especially if they're on the customer side, you actually don't know if they were right the second time or right the first time. And maybe they were right the third time. Maybe they're right the first time and the third time they're all in the water. But you don't know. And so that's a weird thing because in the olden days, people got very attached to whatever the requirement request was. I won't call it requirements, requests were. And if the request or the requirement changed, programmers got really upset because they had an ego, identity involvement in the picture that made of the requirements. This was in the 80s and the 90s very much the case. One of the interesting things in the early days of trying to get people to adopt Agile was to let go of that. is you can't have an attachment to what you think the customer wants. Now, one of the early projects, this is before even the Agile Manifesto was written around the year 2000 or something, if I'm recalling this right. A database person said, but what happens if the project, if the customer closes the project and you're only 2/3 of the way through? And I said, what do you mean if they close the project and it's 2/3 of the way through? Well, they're happy. They're happy with the system we gave them, and they complete the contract and close it, but we're only 2/3 of the way through implementing it. I said, how could it only be 2/3 of the way through implementing it if they were happy? If they were happy, you're done. Well, it turned out that in those days, they made a big data model, right? That was the style of the time, just to make the whole big data model. And they'd implemented 2/3 of the data model. And then the customer said, that's cool, we're done. But I got this other third of the data model hanging around waiting to be implemented, right? And the customer said, I don't need it. And so the database group was very, very unhappy because they had an ego attachment to the data model that they wanted to see done. So this is actually fairly difficult, is to the programmers, build it piece at a time, and the moment your customer's happy, stop. Oh, and by the way, if they change their mind, that's their business. So, change it, make them happy again. Oh, and they change your mind again? What's it to you? Make them happy a third time. Yeah? But it's very strange, and one of the bits that's, and I'll call this unreliable rumor, just in case I get quoted. At the first extreme programming project was at Chrysler, and it ran for some 3 years, just flawlessly. And I was told, it's the unreliable rumor part, that part of its death throes when it finally came to an end was that they had a customer who wasn't as good as the previous customer, and the engineering group, the programmers, were so good at implementing stuff that they would show up so often to their customer and ask what to do next that the customer started to thrash like this. And I'll make it up. It's probably not true, but okay. I don't know, this. They come back the next day. We did that. Now what? Oh, that. Okay, we did that. Now what? This, right? So here's the absence of the long-term view we talked about from the user experience people. This person no longer had a long-term track to steer them on. It's going, it's going to be very frustrating for that customer having this programmer show up every day and say, did that, now what, right? And not have a long-term picture. So we don't know which way is right, but part of it is if you could get some people to help them sort out the longer-term view so they don't thrash. But if they're going to thrash, there's nothing, I don't know, what's choice B is to work less efficiently and slow down and then, work on other projects so you don't build them all the time, and then when the decisions come, they're more reliable. I don't know, right?
I have one more question for you.
Yeah, do that.
It's okay if you change your mind many times if you realize that's the right direction to go, but projects often have an upfront budget agreed, and there's also the change of the team. So how can you reconcile those things?
Yeah,
Are there any practical tips?
Yeah, the question's about, so you're changing, you're going back and forth, but there's a budget. And now we're in the land of strategies. And so I love strategies because I make them up. When I give talks, I make up so many good strategies for people that never implement. But you just make up strategies. It's like, I don't know, it's like popcorn. There's stones on the beach, you just find them. Yeah, and you do that. So here's one. It says, because we want to increment through the contract, we'll make up to 2 changes for any feature and no more. Just because we want to get through it, right? So you guys do anything you want, and then you get to change it one more time, and then even if you're absolutely sure the third one's correct, we're going to move on because we've got to get through this, and we'll put that in the queue at the end. Okay? So we applied that on a fixed price contract where it was for internal users, so we had to make them happy. This was IBM, giant project, all that kind of stuff. And we legitimized this thing. At the first viewing, they could change anything, including, I know that's what I said, but I don't want what I said. In the second viewing, they can't do that. They can only ask for minor changes, and then it goes out, because we have to step through all this stuff. So you make a policy or a strategy of this variety. But I'm just giving you one, not completely randomly made up. So that allows you to balance making them happy here with getting through the requirements list of the contract. Somebody else? Yes, please. Yeah.
I was just wondering, from a coding perspective, how you manage code quality. We've got a bunch of developers working on
We have a bunch of,
we've got developers working on a functional unit,
Yeah.
not necessarily components. So you may have one person building one form and somebody else building a different form, and they're both using, maybe JavaScript APIs and etc. Not necessarily sharing the output of their work, not necessarily using the same underlying libraries that we've already built.
yeah, now that's a really tough one because we're in the general area of how do we get other people to behave the way I want them to behave, which is a general area I don't mess with because I don't know how to do it and I actually don't want the answer to that. But in successful organizations, it always ends up that there's some group of people who come down together, get together, and they make some conventions that operate between them and say, we're going to do this way. They do all the necessary horse trading and arm wrestling, and the general consensus there is it doesn't matter if it's suboptimal for any one person as long as it's the same everywhere. In terms of code quality in Agile, the general rule of thumb in Agile is everything must be full production quality at all times because you may be obliged to deliver it and come back to it in 3 months, and if you write bad stuff, you come back 3 months from now and you don't have any more time to fix up the stuff you did badly 3 months ago.
I suppose quality is probably the wrong word. More about, I guess, education or reinventing.
Right. Yeah. And that's just been a problem that's gone on. I mean, that's a social problem that's been around since forever, and Agile doesn't add, as far as I know, anything onto it. One of the things that was interesting with pair programming that came with extreme programming is it took care of all that different style stuff because in pair programming you're supposed to swap partners every day or a couple of days or something like that, or twice a day, whatever it is. So what happens is you get people with different coding styles and they clash a lot, and so they'll have to address it. And they'll come up with some coding standards. And one of the things that some people did was they just got the pretty printers, the code tidiers, and you push a button, all the code goes into a certain formatting style. And so whoever didn't like that style lost because anybody could come in and push the button and all the code looked like that style. That was just one approach, but in the end it's a social thing. You have to get the people together and say, come on, what can we do? In terms of, I kind of want to show you the slideshow just because it's the vocabulary that I use these days. And it normally takes an hour to go through, so I'm going to go through it super fast. And it's not that I need you to memorize anything, I just want you to hear the way that I'm talking about these things, the topics that I'm going through, and what I use to generate kind of language and ideas and stuff where I go. So, let's try this object. I'll get out of the line of sight there. And for me, this is the basis for real software engineering, the stuff that I talk about. So I've been giving this talk for some years now, and I started off by calling it software engineering in the 21st century, because that's what I think it is. But it also, as I show you here on this first one, is the Agile Manifesto itself kind of invites this kind of a wimpy, lazy behavior that hits a lot of the bad things around Agile. So like, yeah, I hate processes, dump the documentation, don't have to follow any contracts, right? And now I don't have to do any plans. So like, I love this Agile stuff, I'm all signed up, let's go. So if you do this, you get predictably, obviously pretty bad results. Actually, no, you get pretty remarkably good results given for how bad the behavior is actually the really stunning part about all this. Surprises me how effective even badly implemented Agile processes are compared to, badly implemented waterfall. But that's not what the good people do anyway, right? We did a bunch of stuff in the 90s, and we kind of like cast it into these words in 2001. If you only look at those words, you don't get much of it. So this is, I guess I'm going to go through this pretty fast. This is what good people do. Now, what is software development? In fact, any team design activity has got these properties, which is there are only people. It's a pure mental activity. they're inventing stuff, they're deciding stuff, they're communicating stuff. It's totally a pure mental activity. Anything that affects the movement of ideas between minds is going to affect the outcome of the project. And that's not anywhere in the engineering literature. But as far as I'm concerned, that's the center of software engineering. It's the center of any kind of design work at any level between any people. Now, when you solve a problem, of course, you don't understand the problem when you start working on it and the problem keeps changing out from under you. That's just the nature of problems. Oddly enough, also, when you create a solution, you don't understand the solution because you just started it. The solution keeps changing, and you're expressing your ideas in these programming languages or some kind of language, and the languages are always changing, so everything's moving. Now, in the case of software, in the case of civil engineering, in the case of chemistry, chemical engineering, we've got interpreters that are unforgiving of error. If you're doing a different kind of a design activity like theater, journalism, publication, stuff like that, business initiatives, marketing initiatives, in fact, the interpreter of your result is another human, and they're more forgiving of error than nature is. Now, everybody's making decisions. Actually, the unit of inventory, internal inventory, in a design project is a decision. It's not a work artifact, it's a decision. Everybody's making decisions. Every decision has got ripple consequences that go throughout the organization, and we're short on resources, time, people, etc. So that is software development or any kind of design on one slide. Without using any metaphors, analogies, it's just what's happening. When we learn to understand this, then we'll learn how to do better on projects. So we're going to have to learn how to get better at inventing things, better at communicating, better at deciding. Inventing and communicating are pretty well understood. What's interesting for me now is decision protocols inside of companies, inside of groups, is not studied. It's the kind of thing people don't make explicit. It's the oldest senior person wins, the most higher up in the hierarchy wins, the guy who programmed it up last night at midnight wins, the loudest, the sulkiest person wins. You know, we've got really lousy decision-making protocols and we don't make them explicit. So I think there's an avenue of improvement in our industry around making decision-making protocols explicit. So my friend Jerry made this cute little origami thing with the 5 chapters or 5 buckets of topics I talk about are in, and we'll go through this very quickly. I put a self-awareness first. This is basically dealing with the fact that no matter what I say and whatever comes up, it's all theory. What actually happens is the people who show up on the project don't match the job descriptions you put in the newspapers, right? Everybody comes with their own personalities and weirdnesses and hang-ups and stuff like that. And you have to make the project work with the exact strange people who showed up, never mind who you wish would show up. And so this is a lot about that. Now, the good teams, the really good teams, get very specific and very deliberate around what I call self-awareness, team self-awareness, and personal self-awareness. And this actually is in the retrospectives or the reflection workshops is a deliberate topic. What makes you happy? What makes you unhappy? What makes you come unglued and you lose your cool really badly? What makes you shut up and withdraw? We need to know this about each other so we can get the best results. And in the good teams, this happens. A little tiny reflection technique that I showed there on the right. All you ever need to list is this. We've been doing some stuff. What are we going to keep? Well, we'll lose everything. So if you're doing good things in the company and you don't want to lose them, you write them down so you don't actually throw them out the window. And then you've got your problems. Don't talk about the problems too much. Talk about what you're going to try. You should be doing an experiment. Every group should be like trying 3 new things every month. If you're not trying a couple of new things every month, you're stagnating. You just keep changing. Then the next month, you take these try these, you move them over to this, and you find which ones you're going to keep and which ones you're going to drop. Every now and then you'll have ongoing problems you want to document, and you take those up after a couple of months up to the management and say, we need help with these, we can't solve those on our own. So that's in this chapter, which is about self-awareness, personalities, and improvement. The next one is craft, and I always show these 3 characters everywhere I go. And these came, I don't do Aikido, I was reading about Aikido, they have these words, shuhari. Shu's nice, rhymes with shoe. And it means to follow. And so if you go to a dojo, the junior students do whatever the senior teacher does. Whatever, right? The teacher's bow-legged, they're all bow-legged, right? Everything like that. In ordinary skills development, that would be likened to learning a technique. You learn a base technique, and people, when they're beginning, you copy a recipe if you're making your first recipe for something, right? It's your first time being a project manager or object-oriented programmer or whatever you happen to be. You get a book on the subject and you do everything the book says. That's SHU. You cannot avoid SHU. Everybody comes in through the doorway marked SHU. It is unavoidable, even if you don't like it. Okay? People will say, but beginner level Scrum says I got to do this. Right? That's a SHU level reaction to Agile or Scrum, and it must happen. Right? So people like me try to kick you out of the shoebox. That playing on the pun, right? You start with the SHU level techniques. You're in this little box. You can't get out of the box. It's very comfy. It's very cozy, right? But it's not effective. It's beginner level stuff. So after a while, you say, okay, that thingy doesn't work so well anymore. What else have you got? Give me some new techniques. You enter the second stage. Collect techniques. If you're lucky, you get to the third level is re, and that means leave. It's when you leave the dojo. You've learned everything the master has to teach you. You go out into the world and you do whatever you do. Any internationally competitive company needs to have some people at the re level who just smell things, and they do. It's a full body experience. Senior designers, UX people, executives, testers, everybody operates at the re level. Now the re level people operate from subtle contextual cues that give them different answers for every instant. SHU level people are looking for a broad spectrum recipe that's going to work under a broad set of circumstances, but is going to be optimal for no particular circumstance. You see the conflict. Right? So you recognize this, that beginners are going to ask for SHU level techniques, and experts are going to be doing something a little bit different every single time. Which is why I have trouble answering questions, because I'm re-level at this stuff by now. You ask me a question, you leave out a ton of context. I have to try to guess a bunch of stuff into your context. I'm probably wrong when I guess into your context, and my answer's not right for you. Okay. So that's that. And this is, by the way, have you guys heard of planning poker? Any takers on planning poker? Fibonacci numbers, right? Those are cool ideas that got kind of like hardened. They got hardening of the arteries really fast, and have become kind of dogma. But they were just interesting ideas that somebody came up with one day. There was a day before which there was no such thing as planning poker. This guy comes to work one day and says, how about we do this? Right? Made some stuff up. Because this person's re-level. They're making stuff up. The people are making stuff up. They write a book about it, right? Hardening of the arteries sets in, dogma, right? And now people are doing the SHU level. You have to do the planning poker. But people are inventing new variations all the time. So don't get attached to any one technique, because they're always changing out from under you. All right. Craft is interesting because it means we're in a lifelong learning profession. And this turns out to be every profession, not just programming, UI design, testing, but also your managers, your execs, salespeople. Everybody's in a craft profession, and you learn how these things work. This man's got a ball and chain around his so I didn't come sit down. I'm working now with this International Consortium for Agile to build a learning roadmap. That's actually why I'm here tomorrow. There's a workshop. What we're going to do in the business value management track, which is where the BAs used to be, but Agile business analysis is a contradiction of terms, so we call it value management stream. So I wrote the learning objectives for the fundamentals a couple of years ago, and we've written out now. This one should come out in a couple of months. The business value one, there's a version of project management already out. Coaching facilitation is fully cooked. We finished the programming and design one recently, and testing's done. And we're going to keep adding. There's going to be one for executive sponsorship or Agile leadership. So the question is, if people are going to go to courses, what would they in principle learn? And then that's what that is. And then IC Agile's course accreditation agency, kind of like a clearinghouse for courses that deliver to the learning objectives. So that's very interesting. Take a look at that. Cooperative games, thing I've been talking about for about 14 years. So I'm going to go through this one a little bit fast, just because it's been around for so long. The idea when I say software development is a cooperative game, what I'm saying is it's not a competitive game like chess or tennis. We're helping each other like we would in rock climbing. It doesn't go on forever. It's not like your career, but career management is a game that gets in the way of projects also. there's a definite end to at least each round of the game, which is called deliver a piece of software. When you deliver it, you have to live with it afterwards. So actually, this next round of the game is about living with that piece of software, adding onto it, building something else. If we learn about the properties of cooperative games, we would be able to apply them in many, many different circumstances, and that in fact turns out to be true because there's a movement in the startup world called Lean Startup. Anybody heard of Lean Startup? There are Lean Startup discussion groups around. So Lean Startup is following the same rules of software development in terms of knowledge acquisition and things like that. But if you say that software development is a cooperative game, it means that you go into your project, you look and you say, what kind of a position is that in? It's like it's got a position. What kind of a move would we make? Shuhari, there's no correct move. This is too complicated of a game to have a fixed formula for winning it. So you're always looking at strategies and moves that move you from one probably out of balance position in the game to another position that's out of balance. You're always exposed here and covered there. That's a very difficult game. So you talk in terms of strategies. It's one of the reasons I talk in terms of strategies a lot. It's a cooperative game. We have to learn how to get all the people on the team to fit well together, to share their ideas. That's the kind of thing that we're after. And then in terms of software, what I've learned is product lines have got an infinite game kind of a lifetime sort of a way. And IT systems tend to be like games that could end in principle because you just you go out and buy a COTS product for your next generation, whereas product lines are supposed never to end. This is just to remind you about moves. The two sub-goals here are the fact that if you just had to deliver it and you could walk away, you wouldn't have all of the refactoring of the code. You wouldn't clean up the architecture. You wouldn't have the tests. You wouldn't train junior people to become senior people. You wouldn't document it. You would just deliver it and go away. For most software systems, you can't do that, which means that with the same resources, the same people, the same budget, the same time constraints, you are at the same time trying to deliver something and also get yourself in a position so when the next round of the game comes around, you can extend the system, you can add on to it, build a neighboring system. These two goals are in deep conflict for resources, and it's one of the things that makes managing a project so difficult, is you really can't do both of them at the same time. So it's an unsolvable problem. And so you're always playing this kind of weird brinksmanship, going back and forth between those two. This is just a chart that shows there's different kinds of projects. You would approach different strategies for different kinds of projects depending on how many people you're trying to coordinate, how life critical it is, from just comfort up to death. Projects sometimes move, and when they move, by adding a number of people, your strategies must fundamentally change. So you can't just keep using simple Scrum, simple XP, simple Agile out of the book. When you go from 2 people to 100 people, the way you work has to change. I was on a project where it moved in some strange way like that. And we just tracked it over time. And we made gentle changes to the way we were working based on where we see. Here's a thing that says, people work very well at a whiteboard. It's a very rich communication medium. You've got 3D communication, proximity, real-time question and answer, facial gestures, cross-modality, timing. You can see and hear at the same time while they're drawing. It's all going on. When you take away the whiteboard and you go to phone, if you go to chat, if you go to something like that, you strip away the communication channels, and it gets fundamentally less effective in communication. The interesting thing with that is that it's question and answer. You say, well, yeah, but what are we going to do for archival documentation? What are we going to do across time zones? What are we going to do when somebody's so busy we can't get access to them? What when we cannot arrange for question and answer? It suggests that you would video 2 people at a whiteboard. So if you had a sales executive who couldn't be present very often, they would give a discussion, not a lecture, a discussion to somebody else in the company. You video it, and now you've got a record for people to look at, a document for them to look at that's rich in communication and also pretty cheap to produce. And here, by the way, is where paper sits. So it's very strange, right? It's the most expensive, least effective way to produce documentation. So it suggests if you want to do documentation, see where you can replace paper with video of discussion as a documentation format. Much faster and richer. It's just an idea, but it comes out of the theory. So here's a quick summary of the people aspect of the story. Things are always going wrong, and so you want to set up the project so it's easy to detect that something is going wrong. So stuff on walls, people in the same place, all of these kinds of things. Secondly, pride in work, amicability, personal safety says that anybody would bother to mention it to anybody, that they see that something's going wrong, as opposed to just going into the office and hiding all day. And the third one is the mechanics, right? Face-to-face communication, cost of all that stuff. Yeah. What's interesting, though, is if you look at the velocity on a project, leaving aside raw talent, these people issues dominate the speed at which projects move and even the final outcome. It says, rule one, pay attention to the people. All right. Flow management, this is the third of the 5, borrows from lean manufacturing. And I mean lean manufacturing, not lean design. And the shift you need to make is to see that the decision is the unit of inventory, not the artifact. So if you think about all the people in your organization, and include also, for the sake of argument, your client organization, all these people are making decisions. Everybody is waiting on somebody else to make some decision. If you make a diagram of who is waiting on whom for what kinds of decisions, you get a decision dependency diagram that looks remarkably like a manufacturing flow and has, in fact, all the same properties. So all the math for manufacturing drops straight into our lap. Not about, like, I don't know how long it takes to design a piece of a window, but rather the programmers are waiting on the UX people to make some decisions about something about the screen because they can't finish this thing till they finish this thing. Now we look at where are the bottlenecks in the system, right? Who's got the big pile of work in their inbox, and typically you can figure that out in a heartbeat. You know who it is that's got the big pile of the inbox that's full, and you're all waiting on that person. That person or that group is actually the pace car, so to speak, for the whole organization. So these days, with the advent particularly of David Anderson's Kanban, capital K Kanban method, he's looking at organizational flow leveling, flow balancing, and organizational optimization, which is wonderful. We finally have this outside of the programming community and the whole organization. So I just have the graphics don't work very well. So much for that. But most organizations that I go to, if you look, there's big requirements documents that come in, big piles of coding that happen that go in big piles to the testers. And you get these like waves of decisions circulating around, and you have this very unstable system with very bad behavior. You guys can like skew theory. And what this drawing is supposed to show is if you only had like one or two boxes on each, if you flow level the entire organization, you have very tiny feature requests coming in. And the programmers implement very tiny feature requests, and they get tested right away. You can flow balance the whole organization. You get this nice flow of stuff coming out with much better properties. So it's supposed to show with the PowerPoint you're working on. This last one is the one that I live out of most of the time, and I did spend lunch with some of your owners or execs or whatever. Directors, okay. And I showed them this stuff, so I'm happy to show you guys. You could get this coming back at you from a different direction than you expect. You know, when Mike rolls in and draws one of these drawings at you. Okay, so. So I like to give the story to everybody, because otherwise I find that these people quote me if those people never heard of me, so they can't tell if it's accurate or inaccurate quote. Usually it's inaccurate, so somebody gets me up. And the idea here is that we're going to take a look at the growth of knowledge over time and see how that helps us come up with interesting and useful strategies. None of this is in the Agile literature at large. I wrote this in 2009, but it's not in any book because I haven't written any books since 2009. It's on my website, it's on my talks. You can go to my website, and key term is trim the tail. That's what you And this is your basic, as kind of an old-fashioned Big Bang integration type of a project, where everybody's typing and learning a little bit, but the actual learning comes at the very end when you get integrated. And then it doesn't work, or maybe it does work. If it does work, it's a surprise, right? So if it does work, it doesn't work. Either way, it's a surprise, and surprise means learning. So all the learning is happening at the end, which is really unattractive because you've been paying salary costs and all the development costs along the way. What we want to do is to look for an opportunity to get that same aha, but in a little tiny bite-sized piece early. And if we could do that, we would get a learning curve through these little experiments, these little check-ins. Is right. If you do a check-in every day, you get to discover bad news a lot earlier than if you wait for 2 weeks to do a check-in. Right? But we're going to study up on all the different ways that we can get knowledge, we can get feedback early, so that we can get a knowledge acquisition curve that has that shape instead of the other shape. And there are, I these days tend to draw with 3 phases instead of 2, but basically you've got a period where you're really going after that it's going to work. And the second one, which is, now it's working. It'd be nice if you had developers and they said, yeah, boss, anything in any order is fine, we know how to do it. And I've known programmers who were so good. I asked him what was their risk mitigation strategy, and they just looked at me like, what's risk? Well, risk is where you might not deliver because of something. We go, might not deliver? They don't have a concept because they're just so good. They just take anything in any order that when they're asked. So they always start the project here, basically, because they're just that good. But most projects, there's a bunch of stuff that will blindside you. And this curve gives you a dialogue method to decide which of these things that might blindside you pull forward in the schedule and you do early because you want to learn how to get around them. Some people say fail often, fail early. I hate that. I hate that. I don't want to fail at all. However, I want all bad news early so I can succeed in the end. So you pull all the bad news bits early so you have the maximum time to respond to the bad news. I'll go after that in just a moment here. So here's your curve. And so basically, let's just say you've got an optimistic Agile project and you say, yeah, we're going to go, no problem, we got it all, boss. You start working and you build value, the highest value story first. And then you say, oh, shoot skis, that API that was delivered to us doesn't work as advertised, the performance doesn't work, loading something doesn't work. And so you stop and you fix that problem. So you're actually doing knowledge acquisition, but not business value growth. Then you go, okay, we got it now, let's go. So you go and then somebody quits or something other problem and something. And so you get this, the growth of business value doesn't follow the same pretty pattern like the growth of knowledge curve allegedly does. It's pretty, but it's got this kind of a wobbly shape, and you don't find that in the literature. But that's actually kind of what goes on. It fits and starts as you do different kinds of things. What I want to do is to legitimize that and make it a deliberate strategy. So there's 4 kinds of risks or knowledge that you go after. Business risk is, are we building the right thing in the first place? And that's where early user prototypes, early deployment, all that stuff comes in. Social risk, can these people build it? Did we hire the right people? If we didn't hire the right people, there's still social knowledge to gain because the people have to learn how to work with each other. You have to do all the stuff, which is how do you criticize, how do you fix, how do you sort out coding conventions, all those kinds of things. Technical risk are all the things having to do with platform compatibility, loading, performance, all the rest of it. Someone told me a story of an Agile project, and they left to the very end deploying to an iPhone, or from an iPhone to a Droid, and they ran into huge problems when they went to do that. They're going, well, maybe you could have split that story into 2 parts. A risk part, which is what does it take to deploy to an iPhone or a Droid? When we know that, then the rest is nice and safe, and we can actually put the deployment at the tail end. So you can split stories into 2 parts, a risk part and a delivery part. And you use that then to moderate it so you have no late surprises. So your goal is no late surprises. Now, value-wise, you do the most valuable things first, but even here, up in this end, you can be doing stuff like smoothing the user interface, reducing defects, things that are of lower value in case you run out of time, because I propose you will always run out of time. So if you plan to run out of time, you deliberately put at the end the places, the things you would like to run out of time on. And you get to choose. The least used features get the crummiest implementation. The most used features, you won't have time to shine them up. So you shiny up this part, you don't shiny up that part. It's a very subtle application of incremental development. And the final one is cost schedule risk, which I've seen only a couple of times, where people will spot implement bits of the system just to double check their assumptions about how hard something is. Really the code base is going to let them do whatever the next evolution is, and they do that just so that when they may say it takes us this long to do it, they've got some basis for it. So they can do that. The benefit of all that is really what happens at the end. What happens at the end, again, this PowerPoint you can transfer across to, is you get this time window where things are pretty flat, and you get to choose. The business gets to choose. Do we deploy early, trimming out some of the features? Or if you're behind schedule, do we deploy on time, trimming out some of the features? Or do we extend the schedule and then shiny up some of the features that we need to shiny up? And for the very first time, business gets to be in control in a fine-grained way of what the end of the project looks like, instead of working overtime and delaying the schedule. You can trim the tail. So trim the tail is the key word for this, and that's the question. All right, so those are the 5 bits, and I ran through them super fast, but I just want to see you see, this is kind of the state of the industry today. And when you have this vocabulary at your fingertips, you can have a really, really rich set of strategies you can apply to your projects. You can really approach situations in a very different way than if you're just doing the simple, the one-pager Scrum Agile thing, make a backlog, 1 to 2,000, start at the top, go till you're done, till you run out of money, right? That's really not the optimal way to go. It's nice shoe-level stuff, but for more interesting and more complicated circumstances, you need a more subtle approach. So this is some language for that. I got through all of that in how long? Is that a new record? Oh, I said a new record. I got to do the whole talk in 30 minutes. It's like an hour and a quarter talk. All right, that all having been said, we could go back to the question and answer thing and see what you... Yes, please. Yeah.
You mentioned a little clash between business analysis and Agile.
Business what?
Business analysis.
Oh, yeah. Agile business analysis, that's a contradiction in terms. Yeah, because what does business analysis produce as an output? Analysis. Right? So it's what do we, Agile fiends, like to produce as an output? Software. Proper software, you don't exist. Right? You produced a promissory note. So what would it mean to do, now I didn't say business analysis isn't useful, but what would it mean to do Agile business analysis? Right? So the problem that's being faced with where that contradiction is that in very many places, particularly large organizations, a business analyst has no discretionary authority to make decisions. Their job is to take a piece of paper from the left side of the desk and put it on the right side of the desk. And I remember, and I can't say anything about where this was, but this person says, we want to do Agile in our business analysis group. And I said, well, so you have to be like seriously involved with the customers and understanding what they do. Oh, we can't do that because, well, you have to be seriously involved with the testing and the testers so that they test and you know what to trim and to cut. You're dealing with the quality of the product. We can't do that because the testers are in India. Well, you've got to be sitting with the programmers and everything I did. Well, we couldn't do that because they were different. But these people were in this little glass box on the, between the 12th and the 15th floors, moving bits of paper from the left of the desk to the right of the desk, right? I said, you can't do it. You can't play the Agile game if you're going to insist on that. When I was in Melbourne, we did a business analysis evening. Actually, I'm going to do that here also, I think, in 2 weeks. Thursday, 2 weeks from yesterday. I think I'm doing the IIBA is hosting me to do inflict pain on the business analysts in town. And this is going to be a topic of conversation. And what I was talking about, so if you're going to play the Agile game and you have this business and analyst title, you have to get yourself some discretionary authority. So you have to get that with the customers to find out what they want and don't want. You have to play the trim the tail. How are you going to play trim the tail if you don't know if you aren't talking to them about what they want? You have to cut the you have to be the one who cuts the requirements. You have to be the one who's talking with the testers and saying, the testers say this, that's broken. You have to make the decisions. No, we're going to go out with those things broken and those things. Who's going to make those decisions? It's this person, and it's not a traditional business analyst job title, which is why in IC Agile we call it business value management. It's the management of the growth of value with decision-making authority as to what goes out and what doesn't go out. In a sense, aligning with the product owner role in Scrum without those words. And so this is where and the people, when I was saying this in Melbourne, they were horrified and they were shocked. And stereotypically they were. Nice, well-dressed women who are very timid, like little field mice. I'm telling them they're going to have to go tell somebody they are going to get a piece of software. The decision's going to be this. And they're like, I can't do that. But that would require we change our whole organization. Yeah, you have to change your whole organization. If you're going to play the Agile game, people have to have enough power to make decisions. This person is a powerful person. This is the person who says, the product goes out, I don't care. In its current state, we need it out. Or cut that out. Stop working on that. That's not bad. That's a tough thing. But that's what it would mean to play that role. That would be the business value manager, managing the growth of value. So what we're doing for IC Agile, I'm trying to name that blade. The question, the wrestling match I got into with the first person that we were going to help design this, I said, tell me this blade even exists at all. I will assert that it doesn't exist. In Agile, there is no place for this, right? So we had that discussion, and the end, where we came to the agreement that it would exist, I said, okay, it's a two-person project. I've got a business owner and a programmer. There's no BA anywhere in sight. Do I need this blade? And the answer is yes. Because one of the two of them needs to understand stakeholder value, all the stuff about strategizing, the stuff about prioritizing, the stuff about story split. You have to know all of that, and a programmer doesn't natively know all that stuff, and a business owner doesn't natively know all that stuff. So one of the two of them has to go to school and learn all of this kit, right? So, okay, so the tracks are named not after roles, but after skill areas. Okay, so one of the two of them better go learn the skill area. So the skill area, the blade exists. It's called business value management, right? And not Agile business analysis. So that's a long story. It's a good question that you caught me on. But yeah, for the traditional business analyst, this is tough. Yes, please.
You talked earlier on about classic Agile having kind of 3 to 5 people kind of teams. Have you got any suggestions for scaling things like stand-ups up to more the kind of 15, 20 people?
Oh, 15, 20 people is considered pretty easy by standards. In Salt Lake, there was a guy who worked for Symantec in Utah, and they had like 30 people in a room. So and not everybody spoke up every day, but they watched. They knew who wasn't speaking and who was speaking, and people were working together on stuff, and they would do that. And what was cool about them was they had a product owner or equivalent customer during XP that they didn't trust, that they didn't think was going after the customers enough. So these guys, the dev team, would call up customers. They were doing some virus software. I don't know what they were doing. Some semantic thing you probably would recognize on the product. And they'd call up somebody, and they would all stand around the speakerphone, all taking notes. So you had 30 people taking notes, right? So when the product owner or customer would come in the room and say, the customers do or don't want this, like, I'll whip out their notes, and there's no way this one guy, could have the same notes as the 30 people that just been talking to the customer the day before, right? The purpose of the stand-up meeting is to discover what's going wrong. And Ken Schwaber said, gee, I'm sorry I ever wrote that in the book about the 3 questions because it became law. He said, if I was told I had to answer those 3 questions for the rest of my life, I'd get out of this business right away, like I'd quit. It's not my intention to do that. There happen to be good questions. They're good questions because when people answer them, other people notice serendipitously interesting things that are going wrong. Like one person's stuck and that can't get moved. The 2 people are working on the same thing. But this person's working on something that a salesperson sneaked in and asked them to work on yesterday. Right? those kinds of serendipitous discoveries all categorized as things that go wrong. So those serendipitous discoveries are what that thing's all about. And so there are organizations where they change periodically. They just change the format a little bit, different questions, different way of acting and talking, just to get the boredom factor out. You're still, even if you're 15 people, you should still be at 10 minutes a day, 12 minutes a day. If you're past 10 or 12 minutes a day, I think you just need to find a different structure. Question whether you need all 15 people there. The chickens and pigs thing comes in here. I happen to like a physical two-ring structure. This is, by the way, for all facilitated events. Sometimes there's 15 people in a meeting room and you can't tell who are the real decision makers, the people with the real skin in the game. So I actually will construct one end of the table and the other end of the table, or literally a two-circle seating arrangement. So only the people in the center are there because they've got skin in the game, they're needed, absolutely required to close out whatever's going on. And the others are interested parties who may on occasion have something to say, but mostly they're there to listen. And if somebody in the outer ring's talking too much, it's a tip-off, like they should be quiet, or something like that. So you can play games with, like you got 15. How many really, who are the inner circle? I don't like chickens and pigs, but who's the inner circle, who's the outer circle? Right? Pay attention to the purpose of the why you're there. You're only there to have serendipitous discovery, not to resolve. That's it. And then all the resolutions is what's the fewest what is the fewest number of people needed to close out this problem or come up with a solution. It says here that drinks start in 3 minutes. So you guys get to have a 3-minute long question or question answer. Yeah.
How do you deal with enterprise agile?
Well,
you see the enterprise agile manifesto?
Now there's a couple of people out doing large scale agile. Craig Larman has a 2-book series about scaling agile.
No, it's not that so much as the enterprises who will never be agile who say, oh yes, we want you to deliver this project in an agile way, but it must have this full set of features and it must meet the fixed price quote you give us at the beginning.
Yeah, well,
and go through all the things, yes, we want that, but.
Well, I don't wrestle with the whole contract thing too much because I was in IBM in the mid-90s and I cut my teeth on a $15 million fixed price contract with 40 people, one per year and a half. So we spent 3 months coming up with a bid, doing everything we knew how to do, stuff we didn't know how to do. And then that's the box you live in. You can't fix that. And we did every agile thing that, pretty much. Inside the box where the customer couldn't see it, because for efficiency reasons, there was no other way we could get through that project. So projects around us were all kind of falling over and dying because they were doing whatever they were doing. When I was on, succeeded, besides some luck here and there, but we did all of this for pure efficiency reasons, but none of it leaked outside the box. So in that sense, I'm not at all afraid of fixed price contracts with Agile, because Agile just is going to, as choice A, choice B, it's a better choice B than the other one. It's a better choice than the other one for just even getting through a typical overbid fixed price situation. Now, how you negotiate with how you talk the talk and dance the dance, right? What kind of suit and clown costume you put on to make it feel like they're doing some Agile thing when they're not. That's catch as catch can. But I don't, in any case, just to pick up the easy part of the question, fixed price doesn't bother me. Agile doesn't help you with the bid at all. Agile helps you make sense after you've got the bid. Like that trim the tail curve is the best strategy. But put the people together, cut the formality, pay attention to the trim the tail curve, you'll get the best result you can, right? But then help you with the original bid. I think it's Friday night, so thanks everybody.